these guys are forcing the state to admit that, like, oh, actually, all these ordinary people who thought they were safe inside our bubble, they're not actually safe, and we can kind of do what we want. And that profoundly shakes the stability of that power structure. And it's not trivial what's happening. I mean, that's the confrontation that we're headed for in 2024.
I think so. You got started, if I remember correctly, all of the exit Kevin Dolan empire, what I call it that, started because you got doxxed, right?
Yeah. I got doxxed in August of 2021, and essentially, it wasn't just me. It was actually a series of guys who were involved in kind of Latter-day Saint right wing Twitter. It was basically every Monday there would be a new docs release, and we were all just sort of waiting around to see who got. And basically, I people reached out to me when it happened to me, and they were like, "Hey, can we help you out with a job? Can we help you find something, etc." Tons of people who, I think they sort of cared about me, but I think they also were like angry about this issue, and they were like, they wanted to stick it to these people in some kind of way. So they wanted to see me do all right, because that would frustrate and irritate these people. And I had the same impulse. I mean, I had watched 3 or 4 other guys have this happen to them first, and I was like, man, there's got to be some way that we can beat this. And there was probably 3-ish opportunities that were sort of handed to me that I could have taken. But then it was like, it's just a matter of time before the corporate before HR finds out who you are, and like you just sort of live with that fear for the rest of your life. And I don't want to do that. And it also occurred to me that like there was something bigger that was possible there. There was something, because it was so many opportunities, most of which I couldn't take because I wasn't a lawyer, or I wasn't I didn't have the credentials for whatever the job was. But I knew guys who could have benefited from those. And so I was like, let's all get together with all these opportunities and all these things that we know, and let's start sharing information and building things together, and eventually start building things that are actually independent of the corporate system. And there's gradations to that, right? Like a guy who has software skills that are much more transferable is more meaningfully independent than a guy whose job is to like know how Lockheed Martin's SAP system works. And if Lockheed doesn't like him, then like maybe he can go to Raytheon, but like it's Big Five for him, basically. That's his career.
Same picture.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I'm fascinated by the concept of a BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. Your leverage in any negotiation is what you can jump to. That's sort of your floor. And a lot of our guys have essentially no floor, because they can have their health insurance taken away, they can have their ability to make their mortgage taken away on the basis of things they say on the internet. And so the trend that I observed in like 2016, 2017 was that the only people who were free to be honest were people who had who were either completely independent, a guy like Haywood or something, or guys with nothing to lose. And that, God bless our anons. Like I'm not saying anything bad about those guys, but when the discourse is totally dominated by people who have nothing to lose, there can be a lack of seriousness to it. The thing that I've always come back to is like, we can sort of throw around these like wild thoughts. And like 2017 was like a really fun time to be on Twitter because like people were talking about space lasers and like, you know, Hakan was really in like just wild stuff. And I was thinking like, this is so fun, but eventually I have to figure out what I'm going to tell my kids. Like, what do I actually really believe about the world and the way things are going? Like, and not just like tell them something that like won't get them in trouble, but like, what do I actually believe about all this stuff? And I think that that's kind of the biggest challenge for like organization on our side of things is we don't know how to talk about this to normal people. And so we like don't talk about it to normal people. And like we don't have a way of telling what the things that we know to a normal person and getting them to contextualize that in terms of like, I can still be a good person and believe this. And so people are like profoundly bifurcated in terms of like the way they think about politics and the way they think about race, and gender, and sexuality. Like they don't know how to operate in the world. I'm going really far afield here, but essentially, there is this integration that needs to happen that cannot happen unless ordinary guys with mouths to feed and jobs to do have some freedom to speak and to think. And so we started getting together. We started with like accountability groups. Then we did meetups. We started doing working groups where we just sort of like get together and we say like, here's what we're going to do for the next 2 hours. And then we just sort of do it. We have an AI networking bot that we're working on that's going to allow people to kind of provide a corpus of text that they can then use to connect with one another. So that ultimately the biggest problem in like networking is security. Like, how do you get these guys able to control exactly what they share with one another while still, you know, creating that flow and that ferment that creates partnerships and creates client relationships. So this bot, basically, you'll be able to control what you tell it and what it reads on. And then you'll be able to query it and be like, hey, I want to know who lives within 20 miles of me that we could have a barbecue. Or I need a guy who knows about nonprofit accounting. And basically, and the product as it currently stands, I can already sort of type something in myself and pull from the database. But it's not, we don't have the security problem figured out, so we can't give it to other people to use. But it already works, and that's something that we're going to be rolling out this year. So basically, it's just all ways of getting our guys connected, getting them building things, getting them partnering, so that our fate is not in the hands of, you know, a 24-year-old HR somebody with a septum ring.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting earlier about the anon dynamic. Are you saying that the eventual sort of the winning condition, the winning state is guys don't have to be anons anymore? You want these guys to speak freely, but and that they have the sort of the structure in their lives where they don't need to be anonymous anymore. Is that
I think it's
kind of
complicated.
what your goal is?
I think it's complicated because I actually think that censorship produces art. I think that not being able to say what we really wanted to say was really, really like culturally healthy for our guys for like 5 years, because you have to kind of become subterranean. You kind of have to learn how to say the thing without saying the thing, and sort of practice this inception that plants the idea in the mind of the person without getting caught by dummies. And basically, so here's what I think, and you know, maybe this is a little bit of I'm cribbing from BAP a little bit, but like I do think there's a role for kind of an underworld, an anon place where you know, sort of anything goes. But yeah, I mean, like ordinary guys working ordinary jobs should not have to do that to participate in the discourse. Basically, it's like the whole discourse has been criminalized, and so it's it's entirely like this black market thing. It's entirely this like I hate the word dissident, but this not respectable thing. Like all of the questions that matter right now are not respectable and not like socially acceptable to address. All of them.
Mm-hmm. And so what you were saying earlier is that it also makes people on the right, conservatives, afraid to participate because they see that it's been blackballed, like that those topics you can't touch them.
Yeah.
Well, and you're pointing out too that like you get a bunch of guys together naturally, like you're gonna do a lot of cool stuff. Like you're probably gonna like burn some things, blow some stuff up, but it's gonna stay like just civilizationally, it's gonna stay pretty surface level versus kind of the real muscle you get when you're like, oh, we actually need to build something long term, something that has meat to it, and for that you can't just be running around with a flamethrower. You actually need to put down roots and grow.
Yeah, exactly. And it's there is a point at which critique it's just not interesting anymore. And I think you can see that to some extent. Like the interesting projects right now are not talking about what the libs are up to. The interesting projects are things that are being built, and you like there's only so much you can say. Right. And I think a lot of guys are sort of waiting for this disgust response to kick in. Like they're saying, surely if I show you, some sort of one more video of somebody getting the crap beat out of them on the subway, or, somebody doing something perverse around children, like surely the normie will awaken and they will be they will revolt at this. But it's like everybody that you're going to gross out is already grossed out.
Right.
They're not waiting for that. What they're waiting for is a compelling alternative that just does not exist yet. And so I see, I don't know if you would characterize your project this way, but I see your project and our project as building the compelling vision and the compelling alternative that allows people to coordinate in a way that's not just critical. It's not just destructive. One of the rules that we have in the group, we say we keep it Joe Rogan. So like we've got a group chat, right, that where we're talking about our business ideas and kicking things around. And if you can say it on the Joe Rogan Experience, you can probably say it in the chat.
Okay.
And the reason that we
that's good.
The reason that we keep it that way is like security, safety. You don't want to create vulnerabilities
Sure.
where none exist. But I actually think more importantly, it sort of banishes that like endlessly critical, endlessly like fixating on the problem, obsessing over how bad it is. It brings you back to like, hey, let's talk about, weren't we going to start like a shrimp farm? Weren't we talking about like a real estate business? Let's focus on that. And I think that's made the group really, really healthy, really productive group of guys.
Yeah, I think once you at some point when we spoke last year, you described Exit as like fundamentally guys building trust with each other so they can go build things outside of the group, which is cool. Like I think Aaron Wren had a piece a few days ago about how you can't win without an alternative positive vision. Like just criticizing, just pointing out the flaws, just pointing out the cracks is not good enough. At worst, at best, it's just stagnant. Like you're just yelling, like, imagine if the roles were reversed kind of thing.
Yeah.
At worst, you just get real black pilled and could go down some bad paths,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. On that note, so I think the first person who I really heard talk about exit as a term, I think in the sense that you use it, was Balaji. And then, there's lots of stuff with, network states and all of that. On the flip side, there's folks saying, hey, we need to not exit. We need to take back institutions, take back the reins. And then even in the exit camp, I think there's a lot of different philosophies of what exactly that should look like. So based on what the work you've done and kind of thinking about this with these guys, what do you think is the ideal outcome for a project like this, or just for people exiting in general?
Well, so exiting and taking back the institutions are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're linked. The reason that you as a program manager at Amazon can't like infiltrate and take back Amazon, like what are you talking about? Like you're out of your mind. But the reason you can't do that is because you have no leverage in that situation. There's nothing you can take away from them that they need. And in the sense that sort of all of the technology that we use, all of the institutions that we use, everything that provides everything that we need in our lives is captured by these. They're not even. It's not even people. They're captured by systems. Captured by incentive gradients. And you cannot subvert them from the inside. For this, it's like the technology has changed. I'm thinking about like Napoleon and like his ability to mobilize people with rifles and peasants, basically put muskets in the hands of peasants, and the way he just swept Europe with this sort of new social technology, this sort of new way of fighting. And the idea that you're going to like restore feudalism under those like there is no restoring feudalism under those circumstances. You can be like a neo-feudalist and be like, oh, there's we should take from that. But like the world has changed. It is different. You cannot reinstantiate you can't reboot to an older version. All you can do is like take the things that you liked and wanted and try to find a way to instantiate them in this new paradigm. And to talk about like subverting and infiltrating these institutions, subversion and infiltration of that kind lends itself to the managerial bureaucracy. Like that's who can do that because that's who it rewards. That's what it. So Balaji, actually, you talk about Balaji, he has a theory about the sort of red tribe and the blue tribe business model. And the red tribe, there is no red tribe business model. There's a gray tribe business model, the tech business model, right? And the tech business model is you've got a founder and you've got a funder, right? And there's a sort of feudal, like fealty relationship between them. And the founder has an idea and he brings it to the funder who pays for it, and then they go have their liquidity event, their exit. And the blue tribe business model is there's a social entrepreneur, an activist, and there's a donor, a patron, and they go have this idea of some way to insinuate themselves into the machinery of the state, do some activity, agitate for something that then creates a bureaucracy that then creates their liquidity event, which is basically like $245,000 a year sinecures for their people. Mm. And it's like those business models are not arbitrary. They're not adoptable by any old ideology. Like if you're a tech guy, you cannot go like do the blue business model because all the people you will attract will be that kind of person. And the things you'll be allowed to do will be blue tribe kind of things. And conversely, like the idea of a social entrepreneur trying to do like an infinitely scalable like tech startup model for their like, save the whales thing, it's asinine. It doesn't make any sense. And so I think going back to like your original question about like subversion, infiltration of these institutions, it's that kind of a thing. We can't do that directly. Now, what we can do is we can build alternatives on the outside that give us greater leverage. And like, I mean, I actually have guys in the group, handful, who like, one of them, I think it's like Fortran or COBOL. I don't know enough about coding, but it's like this ancient programming language that's like only used for like nuclear missile silos at this point. Mm-hmm. And his company depends on that And so he ran his mouth about some things at work, and he didn't want to get the vaccine, and they pushed him, and he said, all right, I'm quitting. And they let him quit, and then they pulled him back on as a contractor, and they were like, hey, come on back, we need this guy to program this. And that is the kind of infiltration and subversion that's possible, right? At this stage, is to make yourself indispensable, to make it so that they need you more than you need them. And so my ideal state is not like everybody goes and runs a like septic tank business or something. Like, there's definitely guys who need to do that. There's definitely guys who need to climb the ladder and obtain positions of power within the institutions. There's definitely guys who need to work their corporate job and build a side hustle so that they're building runway, so that when the time comes for them to sort of stand and be counted and make a decision about what they will and won't tolerate, that they have leverage to do that, and their families aren't, out on the street.
Right.
So I'm sort of tactically agnostic.
Do you see the recent whole situation with like Rufo and Claudine Gay as an example of this? Like, Rufo he's not a Harvard professor staging a coup against Gay. He's this outsider who comes and attacks, essentially lays siege to the institution from outside, applies pressure, rallies a bunch of people, and then is able to affect an outcome that an insider would not have been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think crowdfunding, just the ability to get small donations from a large amount of people, has really sort of changed the landscape, and he's one instance of that sort of outsider power that's possible now that maybe wasn't possible even like 15 years ago. And yeah, what I love about him is there are structures, what I call, pardon my language, load bearing. There are things that the state still has to say about what it's doing that everyone knows are not true. And there's immense power in calling their bluff. And what Rufo is doing is he's basically saying, like, all right, all the regular people in the world, in America, they believe that they're in charge of their kids. Implicitly, they won't even question that they're like in charge of what their kids learn and what their experience is like at school. They believe that they can like go talk to the kid's teacher about what's being taught and address things, and they're that's sort of waking up to that now. But up until very recently, right? Particularly, you saw that in like the Loudoun County revolt. Like, these are like very rich moms who are sort of used to having their way and being influential, and to be sort of treated like criminals or terrorists because they want to control what their kids are being taught in school was a huge wake-up call for people who are otherwise pretty apolitical. And what Rufo is doing is he's basically saying, with this vouchers and sending money to right-wing Christian MAGA homeschool moms, he's basically saying, like, you need to either admit that these schools are propaganda mills and that you are running them explicitly to control the indoctrination of the nation's children, or you need to give like billions of dollars to these people you hate. And so you win either way, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah. I think it's in chapter 20 of the Gospel of John, where maybe it's chapter 2. But when there's that situation where the teachers of the law come to Jesus and they're like, so is the baptism of John from the people or from God? And then Jesus asked them that question, and then they're like, oh, what do we say? If we say it's from John, the people will, if we say it's from man, the people will stone us. If we say it's from God, then the people will be like, why didn't you believe him? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what you're saying. I think of that a lot in around these days, because just there's a lot of those situations where the state, the bureaucracy, the cathedral, whatever you want to call it, like, has to answer, is basically faced with that question. Like, do we say, no, this is actually useless, and so then why did I go to Harvard? Or no, is actually how things should be, and it just looks more ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. And Moldbug, speaking of the cathedral, is pretty cold on the state, on America, and sort of our Constitution and the legal protections that we have. But I mean, the reason that I fly the flag here is because, first of all, it belongs to us; it doesn't belong to them. But also because the constitutional protections that we still enjoy, they force the state into those kinds of double binds. They force the state into these subterranean situations where they have to lie about what they're doing in order to do it, because it's not legal what they're doing, and everybody knows it. And so when they are in these subterranean, sort of deceptive exercises of power, you can evade them in a way that you cannot evade them in Cuba or China or Russia, because they are limited in their ability. So I did a podcast on why the Taliban won. And one of the things that it's from a book called Out of the Mountains by David Kilcullen. He talks about this theory of competitive control where all these power institutions are maintaining bubbles of authority, where if you're inside the bubble, you're safe. And if you're outside the bubble, you're not safe. Right. And so like in a place like Haiti or Somalia, it's very easy to create these bubbles because the world just is already profoundly unsafe outside the bubble. So all you have to do is create a little bit of security, and people will love you, follow you, do whatever you want. And essentially what is happening with the challenging of this load-bearing is all of these people who think that they're safe inside the bubble, and the bubble is defined by the rules, right? So it is, I am safe as long as I follow these rules, right? And what is happening with Rufo, what's happening with Cody Wilson, with like Defense Distributed Second Amendment challenges, is these guys are forcing the state to admit that like, oh, actually all these ordinary people who thought they were safe inside our bubble, they're not actually safe, and we can kind of do what we want. And that profoundly shakes the stability of that power structure. And it's not trivial what's happening. I mean, that's the confrontation that we're headed for in 2024 is essentially it has been set up by guys like that who are continually challenging the system, and that creates dangers, right? But it's a confrontation that absolutely needs to take place. Like there has to be honesty about what we're doing.
Yeah, the only way out is through. Otherwise, it's just perpetuating it, kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that whole, to your point, the whole President Gay situation is just psychologically devastating. It's not just the actual, her actual position. Like, that's the tiniest piece of it. It's the idea that someone like that who, in the old system, should be absolutely untouchable. Like, president of Harvard, no one's going to touch that person. To kind of throw that person's head over the wall is like sending a signal that like there are cracks in this safety bubble and it may be breaking down.
Right. It did that. And then the reaction around trying to protect her, that the other professor of the Harvard Accessory School that came out and was like, Rufo is actually doesn't really have a Harvard degree because Harvard Extension School is actually not really Harvard. Like all the students that go to Harvard Extension School, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like I thought this was Harvard.
Can you imagine the lawyers? Can you imagine what the lawyers
She's
are
like
going through?
Shooting her own students to try to score points against the enemy. It's like her enemy. It's it's this like again this John situation where they have to either lie about it or just make it more obvious and ridiculous. And that, I mean, like. Make it more.
Part of sort of our like eternal undead boomerocracy, right? Like the boomers are going to be running the country forever. You're going to be dealing with like Madonna being gross and sexual when she's in like her 90s. Part of what that sort of demonstrates, well, basically it's the same people running the country who've been running the country since the 90s. And they, in the 90s, were so much more in control. They were so much more in control of the media. They were so much more in control of the narrative. They had so much more of just the sort of unexamined, unspoken loyalty of the ordinary person. You wouldn't think to question what like almost any doctor said, let alone like the sort of big institutional, like we are what doctors believe institutions. The fact that has all been challenged is exactly why the conflict is becoming so much more like frantic and explicit. Like, you know, they could sort of bulldoze Waco, and that freaked out like a tiny fraction of the population who were already kind of weird. You can look at this with like the sort of the profile of Alex Jones now. Like I remember Alex Jones in the like late 90s, early 2000s, and it, like, you know, he had fanatical loyalty of like a handful of people, but like everybody else thought he was a crank. And the fact that a guy like that who is let's say telling truths in a psychedelic way, right? Like he's sort of like revealing things. I don't know if you guys have ever read Blood Meridian, but I've thought of like Blood Meridian as like it's like this hyper real, right? He's telling the truth in this incredibly vivid way. And that's Alex Jones, right? Like, is it factually, like literally true? No, but is it like spiritually? Are they spiritually psychic pedophile vampires? Kind of. And so anyway, like the fact that guys like that are able to grow is indicative of just how far the collapse has gone. But it also means that like the people in charge, who they used to let Alex Jones just sort of do his thing because it didn't matter. And like they didn't have to like persecute like cranks, but now they really do. They really have to persecute these cranks because they're on par, like they have the same credibility as Alex Jones, just with different audiences. And it's a very dangerous time and a very scary time, but I actually think it's encouraging because it means that it's sort of they're a cornered animal. And like that's bad and that's dangerous, but they are cornered, you know?
Yeah. So kind of along the lines of all this, you were doxxed, but you're still a prolific poster on Twitter. How do you view Twitter? Like, what do you try to accomplish with your use of Twitter?
Oh man.
Is there stated goal, or is it just fun?
Daddy Elon, though, it's x.com.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, forgive me, Mr. Elon.
I'm not trying to get deboosted, but no, I think it's one of the most important moves in the sort of secret war that we're fighting in the last decade. I mean, it's the fact that there is something privately held by an on-side person, where things like sort of what the State Department's saying, what the CIA is saying, what the medical establishment's saying, the fact that all those things can be questioned, and it's not a ghetto, you know, it's not just for our guys. I was thinking about the Bitcoin ETF. I was writing a little weekly post last night, and like, what's beautiful about a Bitcoin ETF is it turns Bitcoin into this thing that they cannot characterize as a dangerous, weirdo, extremist thing that can be shut down for like national security, right? It's like your grandma's going to have a piece of Bitcoin. And I mean, this is already true, right? Like huge institutions have stake in Bitcoin, and it would be tremendously disruptive to them if that were ever, shut down. And so it has kind of insinuated itself into the power structure, and that is one way that you can do it. right? If you want to subvert power structures, you can create technology that gets general adoption, and then can't be shut off. In the Arab Spring, the dictators, one of the things that they got wrong was they thought that they could turn off the internet in order to stop dissidents from communicating, and they ended up just infuriating like millions of middle-class office workers who, like, these guys are so out of touch. They didn't know how many of their sort of apolitical, ordinary middle-class people depended on the internet to do their job every day. And so by shutting it off, they sort of shot themselves in the foot. And I think blockchain is going to be tremendously important from that perspective. But going back to X, yeah, it's creating, and one thing that I think is a little troubling is they do appear to be doing like algorithmic deboosting and censorship, which is it's hard to know how you escape that completely, because we all pretty much agree that there are things that should be deboosted if not removed. And like, you know, there are no free speech absolutists unless you're talking about, like, you know, child sexual abuse material, like that kind of stuff. There has to be things that are there has to be things that are banned, which means there has to be monitoring, right? And then the rhetorical bind that you're in as Elon is like, because we all recognize that some level of monitoring and banning needs to happen, the things you choose, you're responsible for, right? And so that does put him in a challenging situation. And I also think that he's just kind of fundamentally a classical liberal, and so like a lot of the stuff that guys like me would say would also bother him, and he would be tempted to kind of deboost, or because they're and like he would probably say like they're not getting deboosted because they're like dissident. They're getting deboosted because they're like cruel or evil, or like sort of the sort of harm language. I think he still uses some of that harm language, and that's sort of troubling, because he is the king, right? Like he's completely in control of that platform. And so, you know, I hope he stays on side. Like I think he's got the right. I think his heart's in the right place. But that's if you're one of these kind of crazy reactionary guys online, one of the things you have to contend with is like, what if you got your king, and like he had the power to do what he wanted, and some of the things he wanted to do were things you don't like, and you have no recourse because he's the king. Like this is us sort of taking seriously the things that we actually believe in, and it's complicated.
Well, yeah, that is the core definition of a king, and that's what Samuel says too. It's like, are you sure you want this? Because he's going to do some stuff that you don't like.
Yes,
but then you're going to be stuck with it. Like, yeah, we want it. So,
well, but I think going back to what you started with, it also seems to create. Yeah, it's this, you know, some kind of algorithmic censorship is always going to be. It's never going to be quite right for everybody, but I think it also creates the right incentive, especially because the king is on side. The right incentive for guys to post positively. And so going back to the original discussion, like if you're just trying to post fringe about whatever, and maybe it's true, but like if you're just posting like inflammatory stuff all the time, like, yeah, you kind of deserve to be deboosted. Like no one, at some point, that's just, what's the point? Like we all know this, whatever. Like, what can you say positively? What can you move forward? What can you build and develop and encourage people toward, rather than just, you know, fringe statistics posting or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, ultimately, you get into this like burn it all down, like sort of Rage Against the Machine, the tantrum about people being able to tell you what you can and can't do and say. And I think that's healthy. Like I actually think that you need a certain level of that. I think one of the reasons that America is freer than the other Anglo countries is because we have this this healthy supply of Scotch Irish who would like shoot at the mailman. Like I think there's something to be said for that. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, somebody's going to make some rules. That's sort of the bottom line. And you know, we can imagine a world where crypto obviates that, and discourse is truly free. But that will also involve, you know, some human trafficking and some drug trafficking, and like there's other pathologies associated with sort of unlimited license. And I guess I would say I'm an anarchist with respect to this government. Like there is no question of public policy that I want this government deciding about. I want them out of all of it. But there's a recognition. There's sort of like, what do you want in the abstract versus what do you want right now? And I think a lot of people talk past each other on political questions like that. But yeah, Elon is sort of a test of how do you feel about an authoritarian regime?
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's the number one example too of like what you were talking about before in terms of leverage, where he, you know, and even with the other example of the internet, he's like, hey, I have a whole system that provides internet from space. Do you want that still? Do you want to send anything to space ever? Because I own that too. Do you want to save the planet with electric cars? Because I have that. So it's like, would someone who was just a random billionaire have been able to take over Twitter like he did? I don't think so. Probably not with all
the other pieces.
All those other pieces in the background.
Right. It's incredible what he's done. It's incredible what he's done. And this is a I don't know if this is a great advertisement for a Starlink connection because your video is down Starlink connection. But basically what he has done is, he's insinuated himself into the military industrial complex in this really profound way because essentially the first round of any near peer conflict with the United States, the first shot's going to be fired in space. There's no question. Because the only way that the Chinese can restore any kind of parity with us is to try to fight us in the 1970s. Like they've got to knock down our command and control and our ability to observe and navigate the battlefield electronically, and those capacities are totally dependent on. And so the fact that and space assets are like impossible to defend. Everybody knows where everybody's space assets are. They can look right at them. They can shoot lasers at them. They can shoot rockets at them. They can literally just like chuck ball bearings at them. And there's no defending them. Like the only defense is basically deterrent, same as nukes. And so the first shot is going to be messing up our GPS, messing up our SIGINT satellites, and Elon has the ability to. All you can really do about that is get more birds in the air, and Elon has the control over that process.
Right.
He's the only game in town as far as getting things into space quickly, and so they know exactly. They know exactly what's at stake if they make a real enemy of him. And you saw that a little bit with Starlink too. I mean, there's going to be battlefield relevance to that, 100%. And then he was able to sort of unilaterally call off an attack in the Black Sea.
Right.
Yes.
Incredible.
That was craziness.
Yeah, and like that, he didn't do that inside Lockheed Martin. He didn't do that inside DoD. He built this wildly competitive, compelling product that they would be suckers not to use and adopt. It basically sink or swim, right? And by so doing, insinuated himself into their power flows. He made himself essential to them. And Twitter's the same way. I mean, Twitter is a massive piece of Does the Arab Spring happen without Twitter? I don't know. I really don't know. It's a huge piece of their not just domestic but overseas apparatus, and that's really interesting to think about.
Haywood talks about his prediction is that either Musk at some point will have to destroy the regime or the regime will destroy him, and that he will realize this. I think it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Basically, like if he wants to get to Mars, the regime, he's going to have to completely do something. I don't know what destroying the regime actually means, but the regime won't let him get to Mars because he's on the right or whatever. And if you know Elon, if you've read his biography and how he operates, he just doesn't let any obstacles stand in his way. If he wants to do something, he will do it and crush whoever. Doesn't matter if it's his cousin, doesn't matter if it's his son, whoever's in front, he will move him out of the way to get to that objective. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's I think you have to be a little bit of a monomaniacal character to rise to the top in the sort of competitive environment that we're in, and it's illustrative of how they have expelled everyone who wants to do anything interesting. Like the sort of billionaires who get to be on the inside are like. Their motives are like not even comprehensible as human. Like they're just sort of these like maximizer AIs.
Yeah.
And they like have no human agenda. And maybe that's, I haven't met any of these guys. Maybe they are totally normal in person, but clearly the incentive gradient that keeps them inside the system and keeps them saying what they're supposed to say is so strong that like in terms of their big picture impact, they are indistinguishable from like machines.
Yes.
And our system, the sort of vetocracy that we have where like nothing gets through the bureaucracy, nothing gets through the regulations, is expelling at a dramatic rate all of the honest and competent people in the system. And one of the respects in which I feel really fortunate with Exit is like I actually don't have to vet that hard to find like incredibly high quality guys, because the kind of guy who is frustrated with this system is almost by definition like there's occasional like weirdos, right? There've always been weirdos, but like in the main, it's the best. It's the best people at every organization who are the most frustrated, the most disaffected, and because competence is being punished, honesty is being punished, and so Elon is sort of probably the biggest fish, the biggest instantiation example of that process, but it's happening at a massive scale in like every company in the world. And so like what you guys are doing with like the deal room and trying to get these guys, building things together in that respect. There's just so much arbitrage lying on the table. These guys are so underpriced. They're being expelled because they're the most valuable people.
Right. Yeah. We've talked about that even with like our talent network. Last year when we launched it, I guess it was the year before that, but really last year is when it grew. Lots of, interest rates go up, liquidity dries up in the markets, lots of layoffs happening. A lot of the guys that were coming to, the natural assumption would be to say a lot of people are getting laid off. They're going to go to places like New Founding to try to find work, right?
Yeah.
What we ended up seeing was actually people that weren't laid off were coming to us because they're the kind of guy that you wouldn't lay off because they're so competent that you let all the email job people go. You keep, John Doe at Amazon because he's just amazing. Like that guy you were saying, the missile silos. He's the best. but that guy doesn't want to be there anymore. He actually is looking for something dynamic. And so they'll come to us and say, I really want to find something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, like, there's an amazing arbitrage opportunity of all these guys who are highly competent or embedded at organizations across the economy, many at, brand name companies, who would take a different option if they could, that was aligned, where they don't have that sword hanging over their heads the entire time. But you don't realize, you don't have x-ray vision to see, like, you look at a big corporation or any company and say, oh, there's all these guys who are on the same page and who don't go along with the vax mandates or the DEI policies or the mandatory black square on your Instagram, whatever. But they're invisible. But they're there, and they would shift to something better if that option was open to them.
Absolutely.
I wonder. It's a strange dynamic. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was going to put a question to you guys, actually. I mean, like, do you think that in the climate of sort of where we're headed in 2024, it seems like things are going to get a lot more volatile politically and also economically. And, I'm sort of looking around for, like, how do I prepare for this? How do I prepare my guys for this? And I wonder if you guys have thoughts about sort of what is new founding, moving towards some kind of a pivot for that? Like, is there a way of addressing that? Sort of the fact that you mentioned liquidity drying up, and we talked to a VC in our weekly call. I wanted the guys to be able to, like, ask him questions about, like, what do you look for in a founder, and, like, what kinds of businesses are attractive to VC versus private equity investment, and kind of get them a little educated on that. And one of the things he said was, like, yeah, all the VCs right now are, like, battening down the hatches. All the money's scared. Everybody's trying to, like, keep their powder dry. Everybody's freaking out. And I mean, like, what I see, as it's like not a really satisfying answer, but it's like just sort of running as lean as possible, saving aggressively, keep, like, I think we should, as individuals as well as, like, institutionally, be, like, keeping the powder dry, waiting for things to kind of go on sale, just trying to stay alive. But that makes it difficult when your job is sort of this, like, deal flow kind of thing. And I wonder if you have, like, thoughts about, does that need to be addressed? Are you addressing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can still be very lean and deliberate and focused. I mean, part of what happened in really, like, 2019 to 2021 was, when it comes to, like, valuations and investing, it was such a frothy market that you were able to, the machinery incentivized investing in machinery, like, in itself. Like, there was this almost artificial recursion of the market that just a bubble in that sense. And so, yes, you have to get much more focused. You have to be leaner, but it also means that the quality of deals, the quality of people that will stand up to scrutiny and then be able to receive funding or get a team together will be the kind that in an otherwise, like, difficult environment can pull it off. And so it's hard because there's less deal flow, there's less activity, but the activity that does come through, it tends to be much more higher quality. You're not going to get copycat SaaS, at the 10th note-taking app for the right to,
it's like, it's hard.
MAGA Calendar.
It's hard
for conservatives.
Oh, gosh. It's hard, but it's, like, hard, like all good things are hard, in terms of even thinking about, like, blue economy versus gray economy, like you said, like a low interest rate, free money environment. That's like a blue economy type of situation, where you're incentivized to just, like, cut off some of the fat and set up some systems to, like, hey, launch a token or get a ton of funding that you can kind of bleed off of and just be fat and happy, versus a lean environment like we have right now is actually conducive to people who are doing good work and building good things, and saying, hey, we have to focus on what's actually important here, and it's going to hurt, but it's going to force us to actually build something that's good and not just living off the fad.
Right.
Which, and then like just cyclically, historically, like everyone knows that the best big new things are built in the droughts, are built in the winters. So like the people who, made, large fortunes or built amazing things. Even Bitcoin itself came out of the years directly following the financial crisis. So I think in that sense, it hurts, but it's encouraging in that sense from a macro.
There's the joke on Twitter or X. Sorry, Elon. There's a joke on X where it's like, something crazy. There's a crazy video of people doing something ridiculous. I don't know, crashing luxury cars or wasting money, whatever the case may be. And then the comment is like, interest rates aren't high enough, right? I think that still applies for the right. That this goes to your point. Like we're still seeing a lot of cringe stuff come from the right, like the whole, just like Jeremy's razors or chocolates for MAGA chocolates or whatever. Like interest rates are not high enough. Like we need to get rid of all of that nonsense because, and fundamentally it comes down to this. I think as you get into a difficult climate, culturally, politically, socially, and this is something that biology has said too before, but the greatest store of value is a trust-based community. And so you need a trust-based community can only happen when there's high-quality people aiming at the same positive vision with shared rules and aspirations. That will store value. That will create value. There's a sense in which like the 2020s, 2020, 2021, it was the opposite of like a trust-based community. It was like globalism. Anyone could come. Markets are frothy. Build whatever you want. Value goes up, but also value goes down very quickly. When you have to be tight, when you have to know who your guys are, who your people are, that creates value in a way that's maybe a little bit of a lesser scale initially, but it's very tangibly real.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, the collapse of luxury beliefs, what's interesting about that is like our guys characterize that as something that will only benefit us and it will only hurt our enemies. But like we've got some luxury beliefs around here, and it's going to be really interesting to see sort of how we handle that and what survives. But certainly, it's like I think a lot of us are sort of waiting around to see how much fat there is on this beast. How long can it starve before it actually has to change? And I don't know the answer, but it's I think for us it's like we have to be real. We have to be delivering, and there's a way that's sometimes characterized like, did your job exist 200 years ago? Mm-hmm. I think that's like a good religion. I don't know if it's literally true, but like it's a good like sort of principle to think about. But like for me, it gives me this intense drive to make what I do as real and as valuable as possible. Because I frankly want guys who need it. I want guys who need what we are providing and who get so much value out of it that when things are hard, they stick with us and they build instead of cutting and running. And because that's a potential failure mode. A potential failure mode is things get hard, and I have these principles, but I got to feed my family, and so I'm going to go back to the email job, and I'm going to hate it, and I'm going to go into the office, and I'm going to get the vaccine, and I'm going to go to the diversity training because I didn't build what I needed to build. And so that would be the tragedy for me. And so I'm working really hard at this point to create the infrastructure that allows guys to not have to need that.
Yeah. What has been interesting for you thus far in the exit a project? Is it the kind of the fraternal aspect, people building their own independent projects or grouping together on things? What are some of the things that you've focused on there?
All of the big successes have involved teams and partnerships. I think it's rare that a guy is able to lone wolf it, including me. I mean, I lean on a lot of the guys for a lot of things, and basically, and I'm envious of what you guys have, where you have like a team and you're kicking things around. I think that's fantastic. But yeah, it's teams and it's partnerships, and they need each other you need somebody who is going to be pissed off if you don't succeed. Right. Like, because people don't, in general, people don't really believe in themselves. Like they don't, or they accept a lot less for themselves than they would tolerate for somebody else. That's one of the reasons why I think starting a family is so healthy for guys, because I could sleep on a mattress on the floor and just have my phone plugged into the wall, and like that would be the only furniture in my house. But I have a wife and I have kids and I have things I want for them, and I think the same thing is true in business. Like if you have somebody around who needs you to deliver, you deliver. And so that's a big one. And then we've definitely seen that the guys who work the network the most aggressively, they find what they're looking for, because it's all there. Like there's not really a domain of expertise that is not represented in the group. And so it's like, you need like a guy who's looking out with you, if that makes sense, a partner who's seeing the same landscape that you're seeing and sort of triangulating with you. But you also need guys who are sort of the landscape, guys who represent the opportunities that you go out and get, whether it's vendors or clients or mentors or just the expertise that you can get. And that's who succeeds. It's the guys who build a strong partnership or a strong team, and then they go ask the right questions of the right people, and they just iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate. They never stop testing hypotheses, and that's been really exciting to watch. It's been exciting to watch. We got a guy who ran or who started a SaaS business, healthcare SaaS business. And that started as like, do we want to change the way people do medical records? Do we want to, like, they had all kinds of theories that they were sort of batting around, and they landed on this very narrow niche that happens to be like $4 billion niche, but it's like this, the thing that you could not have expected from the initial conditions of where they started in their conversation. And I mean, there were actually like us going out and asking for money for this other thing that we ended up not doing. And so the willingness to sort of try things and break things and iterate and ask questions. I guess I'm spouting cliches, but what I've discovered is that those things are really, really true. And so what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to grease the wheels for the formation of partnerships, for the cruising through the network and figuring out who's who, and identifying the mentors, the vendors, the clients, the talent that you need, and then making it so the guys can iterate without a loss of enthusiasm, keeping them excited about it, keeping them motivated, maintaining the sense that it's not over. Like because your hypothesis was disproven, you're not done. Like you can tweak it, you can change it, you can think differently about it, you can do something else. So basically, it's those three things.
That's cool. The other thing Sorry. The other thing you're focusing on is the natalism conference, right?
Yeah.
And is that part of Exit, or is that different from Exit? How do you see them together?
It's definitely like an Exit joint, right? Like the Exit guys. We were at a meetup and we were watching Tucker Carlson's "The End of Men" documentary, and it's all about the biomedical side of declining birth rates and infertility and declining physical fitness, and just sort of the fact that our ability to propagate the species is collapsing pretty dramatically, medically. And I thought, there's a lot more to this issue, and sort of the defining ethos of Exit is like, why do we all need to do this? Because we need to have grandkids. Like, there are lots of political situations in which people can be more or less happy and lead more or less normal lives. Our current political situation is one in which if you do what you're supposed to do, either you or your kids will be essentially sterile. Like they will, your line will not continue. This is a self-eradicating cultural contagion. And so when I think about like, why do I need to be able to run my mouth on the internet? It's not because that in itself is so important. It's because if these things don't change, and if I don't do something different than what's sort of out there in the culture, my kids won't have kids. They definitely won't. And so we were watching this documentary, and we were like, actually there is this medical side, but there's this much bigger picture. There's this social element of like how incredibly deranged dating has become, and sort of the relationships between men and women, and the economics of family life and family law. All of these things militate against people having kids and starting families and starting stable families. And I realized that I knew like half or 3/4 of the people who did that documentary. And so I was like, let's see if we can get those guys together. And like Tucker's talking about this, Elon's talking about this. Let's see if we can like make some noise and get some people together. So we got together in Austin. We had about 100 people in attendance. And basically there were people there who had been to Singularity Summit, and they were like, this is the same kind of energy. Like, it's these incredibly smart, incredibly like honest people coming together and addressing a problem from profoundly different angles. Like you had like people like Malcolm and Simone who were like, we worship our descendants and we believe in artificial wombs, and we like all the kind of like wild tech things that you can believe about natalism. And then we had like sort of traditional Catholics who were like, yeah, we're not going to use contraception. We're not going to, like sort of the two far poles of like how, let's say, technologically optimistic or pessimistic you can be. And on this question, and we had a marvelous time. Like the one of the things, there's this lady, Diana Fleischman, who is like certainly not like on side with everything politically, but she said, I think the natalism conference had the lowest rate of psychiatric and personality disorders of any conference I've ever attended. And I was like, what a nice compliment. That's I really think that like the kind of people who can see this problem coming and who really care about it, it just selects for a really cool, really interesting, really smart, well-intentioned kind of person, pro-social person. Mm-hmm. And I see that as like, I think it's our climate change. The way climate change rallied from the top to the bottom of sort of the blue political spectrum. Everybody got exercised about this one issue. Like this issue, it's like, it doesn't matter if you're like MAGA in, Kentucky. It doesn't matter if you're like a eugenicist in San Francisco, like you care about this issue because you care about consciousness and human existence and life. Like you think those things are good and should continue. And so it's like there are certain issues where you can reach like narrow agreement with people you don't fully agree with, right? Like maybe we both care about the baby harp seal, but this is an issue where like everyone who cares about it cares intensely about it. Like the tech people, like it's Elon and Tucker, right? Tucker is representative of this more like sort of traditional right kind of maybe paleocon or whatever you want to call him approach, and Elon is this like I want to go to Mars and I want to in like transhumanism and like all the kind of Bay Area stuff those guys are doing. But there's a synthesis where they both care intensely about this problem, and so I see it as a way to bring those people together and get them working, and you saw that at the conference. It was incredibly, incredibly collegial and warm and productive, and we're absolutely doing it again in 2024, and looking for people to get involved and help us with that. So it's natalism.org. The people can check that out, but it's man, it was a really exciting time.
Yeah, we had a friend who went down there and joined, and he said the same thing. It was just an incredible group of people, smart, grounded, just good people. So, yeah, who would have thought that people who are pro-baby are not psychopaths? You know, there's something there.
Yeah, and it's also it's so difficult. Like you can go. We got some hit pieces. We got a hit piece from Miss Magazine, which I didn't know was still around, and the Guardian and the Austin Chronicle, and I think there's one coming out shortly. I think it's targeting Elon, but I think they're going to mention us. We're not affiliated, but we're both doing this, I guess. But connecting the dots. Yeah. But basically, like you read them, and they're really reaching for like a reason for this to be bad. Basically, what they've got is it's bad people talking about it. Like that's like you're a bad person, and so we shouldn't listen to you on anything. And then eugenics, that it's you can't want smart, healthy babies. You have to like. And of course, if we didn't say we wanted like in particular smart and healthy babies, if we didn't like, and that's not even my approach, but like some of the people there are like openly like, yeah, let's help people have smarter, healthier babies. Even if you didn't do that, they would still be like, oh, it's because they're fundamentally anti-life. They're fundamentally anti-existence. Like. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like on Google Trends, antinatalism is like quite popular on like TikTok and Google.
I've not seen that.
Yeah, it's this whole like mirror universe that I wasn't aware of until I started doing like some oppo. There's a lot of people who are like humans shouldn't exist, and some of them are even like animals and microbes shouldn't exist, and like so we should like glass the planet. Like it's like genuine supervillain level crazy, and these are like not small accounts. And and so I feel very fortunate in my enemies, right? Like I feel like it tells me I'm on the right track if I'm opposed to like Thanos. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I'm sure there's a anti-Kevin out there that just has hair on the sides and back of his head. Trying to glass the planet.
I saw that guy.
Instead of exit, he runs the longhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you think? What will you do different in the second iteration of the conference? Is it going to be more speakers, more I don't know, more workshops? What are you looking to improve and enhance?
Definitely more of a mix of like the unconference format. The fact is, like, the crowd was as interesting as the speakers. Like, there were some really, really interesting people in the crowd. And so giving them more opportunity to sort of have a multilateral conversation, I think is fantastic. We're definitely still going to have some speakers, but we're going to do a lot of unconference stuff. We're probably going to do a single ticket instead, because like basically everybody wanted the full experience. That was what we found. So we're going to have just a single ticket next time, and probably have it at a sort of mansion style, wedding venue style Airbnb, so that it's not as well. Frankly, like a hotel is just sort of harder. It's not
pretty static.
And we wanted it to be a place that was a little
less
more
corporate-y,
comfortable, and less corporate-y. And basically unconference format for a lot of it, and it's going to be about deal flow. It's going to be about finding people who need to be working together, either as investors or founders or social entrepreneurs, people who are building things, connecting them with the resources they need to make it happen. Because there's a lot of will around this issue. Like there's a lot of sort of potential energy that isn't yet being deployed. And seeing Elon and Tucker kind of bang the drum on this issue makes me think like so put it this way, anything Elon's saying, there's like 50 other billionaires who are like scared to say it. And like, they're kind of waiting for Elon to open the Overton a little bit more. And that I think, is just a tremendous opportunity. And then none of this is priced in. It's like nuclear war. I was in Lockheed strategy for a while. And so we would talk about like, artificial islands and radars and all this nitty gritty, like gaming out what a war scenario with China would be like. But nobody would ever say the N-word, which is nuclear. And they would just throw that under the rug. They would be like, that probably won't happen. I asked the guy, like, why aren't we talking about nuclear war? He's like, that probably won't happen. And I realized the reason they don't talk about it is because none of the institutions that are incentivized to address these problems will survive that. And so it's like planning for the afterlife. It's like there's no, there is no them to care about that future. Mm-hmm. And so, and you see the same phenomenon in Korea. Like there's no program manager for global thermonuclear war. There's a program manager for F-35, and there's a program manager for the satellites and for the radars. And so like there's somebody whose job it is to care, but not for this. And natalism is the same thing. Like Malcolm Collins talks about this when he was a VC in Korea, and he would go talk to these like big institutional investors and be like, "What are you doing about the fact that nobody's having any babies?" And they're literally like, we don't talk about it. Like we don't deal with it because none of these institutions will survive that. And so they can't care about it. There's no way for an institution like an insurance company or something to bet on that in a way that they win. And so they don't bet. But like an individual can totally make plays that bet on that and win. And so what I see is kind of, from a financial perspective, from an investment perspective, it's like, how can the people who are going to be like carrying the fire, how can the people who are going to be continuing civilization into the future, who are going to show up, how can we arm those people with the investment tools to like make the smart choices so that they have the resources to actually do that instead of just getting subsumed with everybody else? Because this problem is going to get worse as it gets worse. Like it's not just that it's hard to start a family, it's that it's getting harder to start a family. And the less kids there are, the harder that will be because the tax base will evaporate. And so it's like it's not enough to just start a family and have kids, as hard as that is. you actually have to like play it really smart. and so like it's this really challenging, and like part of the challenge with like sort of pitching this is getting people to not despair. Because like if you say like, oh yeah, the world's going to be on fire in 50 years because of this demographic collapse issue, then people are not going to be like, well, then I'll go bring kids into that world. That sounds great. You have to talk about what's possible and what's beautiful and what's exciting about the future. And there actually are profound upside opportunities that are not priced in, not being addressed. And that is like really, really good news for people like us.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you see as the kind of the key drivers for the loss or the decline of fertility rate in the U.S.? Korea has its own issues, whatever. And then kind of in the context of the conference, like what were the agreed upon, like these are the core issues driving this? You mentioned dating apps earlier, I think. And then on the flip side, what seemed to be the more promising paths out of that dearth?
Yeah, so I mean, in the U.S., it's primarily about getting to the first kid. So Stephen Shaw has a documentary called Birth Gap, where he talks about like who is and isn't having kids. And one of the interesting things that he said is that it's not actually families that used to have 4 kids now having 3 or 2 or 1. It's actually like most of the families having modest declines in their family size, but nothing dramatic. It's mostly people having no kids at all. That's what's driving the decline. And that, I think, is definitely driven by the sort of confusion of our the agreement between men and women. You know, the sort of default assumption about what a man and a woman bring to a relationship and what the expectations are of them. And it's like, I'm not a, like, you can't go back. We're not going to recreate the 50s, and it would be suicidal to try. But going from a stable understanding of what the relationship between men and women is to this situation where like these 2 atomized individuals have to like synthesize all their values from like stellar hydrogen, and then they have to like hope that those values coincide and that they can negotiate that in a short enough, like basically what's happening it seems like is people are trying to get their economic and like spiritual or philosophical situations squared away before they'll have kids, which is like not an insane thing to do. That's like not, I don't blame them for wanting to do that because we are in such an economically and like spiritually unsettled time. And like the answers are not provided for you. And so you got to have some answers. And the problem essentially is that takes too long. That like by the time men and women feel like they've figured themselves out, they're like 37 and it's kind of the book is closed. And that's just, by the way, figuring out themselves. That's not also like who's my partner. And so there's this massive like amount of research that's going into like, I'm going to be with this person for like 5 years to figure out if we're a good match. And like, if you're 20, then you can do like 3 of that guy, right? Like you can have like 3 boyfriends that you investigate at that level of resolution. And like, what are the odds that one of those 3 is going to be compatible with your like crystalline, personalized value structure that you invented that nobody else has heard of? Like, it's like
yeah, that will change next year when the TikTok algorithm changes. You know,
and I don't want to be too dismissive of their difficulties. Like that's a real problem.
What?
and besides which, hypergamy is a real thing. Women really do want to be paired to someone who's higher status than them. And when the state's explicit goal is to eradicate that status disparity, it's like, well, then you are eradicating the terms by which men and women find each other and fall in love and have babies. So as far as how you fix that, I don't know that you fix it in the aggregate. I don't know that you fix it systematically. I think you can connect people who care about this with each other. And I think you can connect families that whose kids should meet. I think you can do that. And I think big algorithmic systems are going to take a real bath in the next decade or so. And I think what's going to be left over is systems predicated on human judgment. And mediated in some useful ways by technology, but primarily predicated on human judgment. And so I think I set my sights at a human level of resolution, like how many people and how many sort of cultures and how many sort of memories can we preserve and carry forward, rather than how do we turn the whole battleship around? Because I think that's a little quixotic.
Yep, that's our. I think that's our bet too. New founding, prizing human judgment, and moving away from algorithms that mediate your life that are controlled by some entity or system, and back to again the greatest store of value being a high trust community. It's a community where the inner memory of that community can shape and direct the members of the community towards optimal outcomes. So, Kevin, I think it's a good time a good place to stop. But where can people follow you, follow Exit, and then get involved or purchase tickets for the Natalism conference when they go live?
Yeah, so it's Extra Dead JCB on Twitter, it's exitgroup.us, and it's natalism.org. Those are the three places I'd send you.
Sweet. We'll put those in the show notes. Dude, thanks so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs founders building dynamic companies, powered by American ideals and a positive national vision. These are the kinds of founders that embody the optimism and competence of the people who come on this podcast. If you're interested in investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture fund and follow the link to apply.